and welcome to another Wrestling Roundtable discussion podcast. I'm Adam Wilbourn from WhatCulture, joined by the Dudley boys of WhatCulture, Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick, to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes or Spotify for daily wrestling podcasts where we review pay-per-views, Raw, SmackDown, we have interviews, more roundtable discussions like this one, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. But gents, lots of people still talking about the fallout of Elimination Chamber. And so I want to know, as a result of that, what's next for Kofi Kingston?
The Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal.
Oh, no.
Look, I don't like it any more than anybody else does, because I think this development, which is all completely a product of our collective minds, a hive mind, if you will, of the internet wrestling community. I hate that phrase, but it is what it is. It's shorthand. Look, we've got this mid-card talent who, to the core hardcore audience, we have a bond with him. We've been through his highs, lows, and middles, and all the rest of it for a decade now. He has consistently wowed us with his athleticism, his creativity. He's been subject to some really inattentive booking, and throughout all of this, we've stuck by him and we've connected with him. We have a bond with him. He's arrived as a player in two of his career best performances over the past fortnight. This story comes with an inbuilt dramatic heft, and all of this stuff that I'm saying right now means absolutely nothing to Vince McMahon, because he isn't an established main event name known to the casual audience he wants to watch WrestleMania, and it's just that reductive and it's that simple, and I'm sorry.
I mean, it's not the first time lately where WWE have benefited from the happiest of accidents. You know, if you look at where we're at with Becky Lynch, the man, they assumed that people would just take to her turning heel. Daniel Bryan is the WWE champion because Nia Jax put a fist through Becky Lynch's face, and look what he's become off the back of defeating AJ Styles. We now find ourselves with Kofi Kingston as a replacement, with 2 weeks' notice, was it, before a pay-per-view? Being chanted by, 3 nights' worth of a SmackDown taping, Elimination Chamber, and now Monday Night Raw, being called upon to be the next challenger to Daniel Bryan's title. That is a vacant spot on SmackDown at the moment. I actually think they're going to go with this, but because he was never in the WrestleMania plans, he's going to hit that brick wall at Fastlane. I personally believe that he will get the shot, he won't win the match, and then it's WWE's decision whether or not to try and make the most of the momentum that he'll likely still have, because fans would rather see him go all the way to WrestleMania. I'm not as optimistic that on that stage they will ever see him in that light, because otherwise they probably would have done it already.
Looking at the fallout, from Elimination Chamber, and I've seen a lot of people in the comments and on Twitter and what have you saying that he probably should have won the WWE Championship at Elimination Chamber. That would have been the perfect moment to crown him and give him that lovely moment. But a lot of people saying if it's not then, they are presuming or hoping at least that he will be in the match for the WWE Championship at WrestleMania. You don't think that's going to happen?
No, not at all. No. It's that simple. Realistically, they could quite easily craft a storyline in which he wrestles at Fastlane and loses again.
That's how I'd see it going, yeah.
Yeah. And that's, for me, that's the ceiling. I don't want it to be, because I think this has got something behind it. And I think, if nothing else, we're going to WrestleMania. It would be nice to get a match that the people demonstrably want to see, and will have loads of crowd heat behind it, because it's a tough old 7-hour slog. So for that reason alone, my subjective personal entertainment, I would really like to see it. I just can't see past the cynicism that clouds WWE.
I will say this for this sudden Kofi Kingston push, and this sudden, kind of as Michael Sidgwick says, almost like it's as if we needed a reminder of what he's offered us over the last 10 years, rather than we've been constantly clamouring for him to get some sort of push. I don't know if this was them calling it on the fly or this was an instruction, but I was wowed by Big E and Xavier Woods' very subtle acting at the end of the Elimination Chamber. They gave Kofi Kingston the applause spot, and we went off the air. It was definitely a WWE call to tell us that what we've witnessed for Kofi Kingston was important tonight. But Big E and Xavier Woods maximised the minutes, as they're told to, with the looks they were giving. Big E in particular kind of had that almost that air of I think as we talked about, it should have been me. Should have been me. That maybe there's a certain sense of entitlement because he was, broadly speaking, a single star before the New Day, and maybe assumes that he'll be one again because of his size and because of traditional values that Vince McMahon holds. And I do wonder if, assuming that Kofi Kingston does lose his last title shot against Daniel Bryan, whenever that is, if whatever the New Day have got planned for WrestleMania, if something bigger, such as a split, is going to help Kofi Kingston be elevated that way instead. I've long thought that the plan was to get the belts back on the Usos so they can do the Usos, the Bar, and the New Day one more time at WrestleMania. A modern retelling of the Hardys, Dudleys, Edge and Christian feud where you've got these three tag teams that have been the anchors of a wonderful division. You give them the WrestleMania match that they deserve, because last year they were there pretty much to carry the Bludgeon Brothers through an inferior version of it. That could be the catalyst for a New Day split, which we could then trace back to this accidental push that Kofi Kingston's received.
If not that, then, and if we do see a potential singles push for Kofi Kingston following that, is there an argument for him to be in and around the world title scene going forward after WrestleMania, perhaps?
I think certainly, if nothing else, he deserves another opportunity because he's grabbed this one and he's created. Like, I don't mean to continually dump on Seth Rollins. I'm just using this as an objective comparison. There is one male babyface roster member with loads of organic support behind him heading into WrestleMania, and it's not the guy who's wrestling Brock Lesnar. So this is something quite big that's happened overnight, and I just wish they would serve a character like Kofi Kingston, not just on his own merits, but we're going to discuss something else very imminently, and it just feels like recently Cassius Ohno has got it perfectly right. Like shiny new toy syndrome in WWE, and there's lots of broken old toys that we've been conditioned to not give one toss about. And on that basis, it would just be nice to be reminded that the preceding months of our lives actually matter, and the people we've watched actually matter.
This is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but I genuinely mean it as a way to try and inspire optimism in those people that have suddenly found the love for Kofi Kingston all over again. He's a prime post-WrestleMania push candidate. They have done much worse with far inferior talents than
Darren
Kofi
Young,
Kingston.
Jinder Mahal, shining stars.
You know, we've got years and years and years of precedence to this. Kofi Kingston is somebody that at least deserves and would warrant the spot should they just elect to give him one.
One thing I thought of, and I've seen people suggesting this on Twitter as well, is would he not be one of the most perfect people on the entire roster to win Money in the Bank?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then he could cash in advance as like a proper babyface should. Like, I'm just going to wrestle the best night of my life and you're going to know about it. I'm going to do it in the fairest way possible, which is something we've seen at once with Rob Van Dam. Mm-hmm. And it literally went up in smoke, which we all know. But it's a storytelling device that you can actually make you believe in a babyface and have a babyface like portray themselves as likable and honest and all these things that babyfaces should be.
And if you don't opt to go with that option, you
Here
go
we go.
for the instant cash. No, just imagine
I thought we were going facetious Wilbourn.
Oh, no. But if you think about the pops that you had with like a Dolph Ziggler cashing in, imagine Kofi Kingston cashing in after
It's a shame we're at the time of year we're at, because had this happened in November, you'd suddenly have a great argument from actually winning the Royal Rumble rather than just escaping elimination, because that seems sort of like overdue in his career, doesn't it? These escapes are meaningless as long as he continues not to win. So that would have been as nice a way as any to get him to WrestleMania or to get him into a title program. But Money in the Bank feels like a solid second.
But people have always like said, and we're talking in small niche hardcore circles, the likes of which Vince McMahon pays no mind to whatsoever. Like Kofi Kingston, he can talk now. He's a vibrant character. He can certainly work. Why not try with him? And my argument's always been, well, he's just an established, stigmatized mid-card player. That increasingly feels not true at all. He's certainly got like main event level credentials. So I'm saying personally, I would like to see it. I just cannot see it happening.
I'm sure the conversation could go on about Kofi Kingston for a long, long time, but I do want to mention some other names that have been highlighted, let's say, recently in WWE and what you think the future could hold for them. And I want to discuss the recent NXT call-ups, not the ones they've already botched, like Heavy Machinery and Lacey Evans.
All of them.
Already?
All of them already.
We may get to. But we saw on Monday Night Raw, we saw Ricochet, we saw Aleister Black, we saw Tommy Ciampa, we saw Johnny Gargano. They all made their first appearances on the main roster, aside from the Royal Rumble, for example. What does the future hold for them?
Oh, I've got lots and lots and lots of thoughts about this. This will come across as tiresome to a lot of the listeners and the viewers because, like, Ciampa, Gargano, Ricochet, and Black, you've got like 4 of the best pure actual workers and arguably characters on that entire brand. Many people, the likes of us included, have long petitioned for why can't the best guys in NXT, i.e. 4 of the best pro wrestlers on the planet, be on the brand that means the most and shapes the most important moments in WWE. We got that last night, and I'm still completely underwhelmed by the whole thing. Like, completely underwhelmed by the whole thing. And in answer to your question, until I'm convinced by consistent long-term booking that makes sense, I can only forecast despair and cynicism.
I don't think you're the only one in this case. Was the only kind of comment I want to make on the 4 call-ups at the moment, because I think you've got to try and be optimistic in spite of yourself sometimes with these NXT call-ups.
Why hurt yourself?
Because it constantly feels like you're getting beaten down by the disappointment of these call-ups gone wrong. But I'm already wary of these 4 because I watched Triple H flub and cry inside through his Raw promo. You could tell he was a man that today has had his favourite toys taken off him and trodden on them by his abusive stepfather. It was so tragic to watch him bumble through talking about NXT. He forgot his catchphrase about it being the global third brand, and he had to reveal their faces on the Titantron, which is all they were. They were just faces on the Titantron now. They weren't his characters that he's lovingly helped craft over the past 2 or 3 years. Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano weren't the 2 people that for nearly 3 years we've watched build one of the most complex and intricate stories, maybe in company history. They were NXT call-ups, no better or worse than EC3 and Otis Dozovic. That was what they were in that moment, and Triple H knew it. And the sadness in his eyes and that desperation, while he was also wanting to talk about the fact that DX were going in the Hall of Fame, there was no energy to that. And when he's putting himself over, normally he's got all the time in the world for it. And you could just see he's a man that's had a very, very bad day at work. And that doesn't exactly fill me full of confidence when everything about these guys should be the ones that you would have hoped that have come up one at a time, and he'd have very carefully coaxed Vince McMahon into making a series of better decisions than what we saw on Monday.
I've gone from being quite a casual fan of NXT to being a lot more devoted for obvious reasons. And this was the most I've ever noticed someone coming from NXT to the main roster and getting what I'd describe as a sort of meh reaction. You know, when Ricochet made the run-in, which is a run-in, which should he at the very least get a decent pop, people were just like, who's this guy?
I've seen a lot of heat that the fans have been getting for the live crowd, and I think that's really unfair.
I think it's really unfair as well. Sorry, just carry on. But I've got one thing to say about this before you'll elaborate on it. It is absolutely and unequivocally not the responsibility of the crowd to get a talent over. It is the responsibility of the wrestling promotion, keyword promotion. Promote those acts effectively, and more often than not, the crowd will respond accordingly. Carry on.
Well, and what we know about NXT, in spite of what you see on the takeover weekends and how we might all feel in the hardcore hub of wrestling fans that we are, is that it's a minuscule percentage of WWE fans that would tune in for Raw that watch this product. There's enough to fill stadiums for takeovers on big pay-per-view weekends, and there's enough to make sure that Full Sail feels energetic and alive in that Orlando home base. But every call-up is the same story. Unless you're a talent that can immediately show your ability, and I think Ricochet is a perfect example, because by the end of the match he was certainly over, nothing that they can tell you about a talent is going to make an audience care, not least because they've had their fingers burnt before. If they were going off a Triple H or a Vince McMahon or anyone, one of us, coming onto a broadcast and saying, this guy's great, you're going to love this guy, then why would they have any sort of faith in that after time and time again they've been let down by these pushes gone wrong or these call-ups gone wrong? Triple H doing that address at the start of the show where he tells you that these 4 guys are great mean absolutely nothing until they show it. And the reason that Ricochet was the one that got the massive cheers was at least he was able to reflect everything that had been said about him. Ciampa and Gargano coming out such a tepid reaction for a match that to all of us, a rematch from one of the greatest matches in company history, to go through a 10-minute chinlock on Monday Night Raw was so depressing. But it's not the fault of the fans. They've been given no reason yet to cheer and to feel as invested. Yeah,
absolutely. I will, before we go into each individual name, I will again reiterate it's not the responsibility of the crowd to get the performer over. And if we are going to use the excuse for the lack of reaction on the city in which Raw was held, I can't recall off the top of my head. Lafayette. I mean, again, it's just not the responsibility of the crowd. And if it is in some kind of through the looking glass scenario in which we need to debut a certain act in a certain town and have the audience dictate it, which for me is the fundamental problem, because previously you see this sort of thing on the post-WrestleMania Raw, and because they know they've got the most amount of hardcore, most invested crowd on their hands, they trot these guys out to receive an inevitable reaction, and it's left for the more casual fans in other less smart cities to infer that they're stars, and it's lazy, and it's really lazy. And the fact that they even with that mentality, which is evidently true on the post-WrestleMania Raws, even if they have this mentality, oh, well, the crowd can do our job for us, why pick that crowd? And it just smacks of sudden desperation and a lack of forethought, which just creates a horrific omen for what could happen to their careers.
Something I was thinking about how they were all... It wasn't necessarily individually dropped into matches because they still all felt very collective, even though they were introduced separately. Was if you look at Elimination Chamber, I think the only negatives coming out of that show was the mid-card sinkhole caused by the Monday Night Raw matches, the Finn Balor Bobby Lashley match and the Braun Strowman Baron Corbin match.
Drew,
And on this edition of Monday Night Raw, what we got, where we're supposed to be excited about these NXT call-ups, is another 20-minute Baron Corbin Braun Strowman match, and it was Ricochet being inserted into that sinkhole alongside Finn Balor with Bobby Lashley. And these people that, if this is an acknowledgement that Raw's mid-card's in such a state that we need to do 4 instant call-ups, then why do you then immediately infect them with the stink of these mid-carders that you're looking to kind of brush aside in the first place? It was so illogical that it has to come from that quick fix mind of Vince McMahon on the road to WrestleMania, looking up and down his roster and thinking, I haven't got enough to fill a card here. I just haven't got enough. Triple H, give me your guys. Give me your favourites now. Give me a list. Or give me those pictures that you showed me when I picked Lacey Evans. You know, like the decision-making is not being done with... It can't be being done with any forethought. There is no way that these 4 talents have been given a month's notice to try and start thinking about how they're going to wrap up their NXT careers. They've been told yesterday.
If it's long since become a meme, the whole Triple H, oh, I've got a plan and you fans don't know what the plan is. We'll never call up any performer without a plan. I mean, that's a complete load of bollocks. We are intimately,
We're in the era of
depressingly...
the 2-week turnaround, aren't we? They can just tell you that a guy's somebody and then in 2 weeks try and make it happen.
Yeah, the whole thing just had such an air of desperation. And all I could think about was, if we're getting some shiny new toys to play with ahead of WrestleMania season, and this felt like the Raw after WrestleMania, except without the crowd heat and without the excitement and without the buzz, I'm given less reason to care about the existing dead acts like your Strowmans and your McIntyres and your Lashleys. Why? I don't need any less reason to care about them. Make me care about them first, because, as you say, it's just short-term thinking that is just going to mask fundamental rot long-term.
Now, I want to talk more on another podcast, perhaps, about these broken toys, as we describe them, and how we can perhaps recover them, a la, I suppose, a Kofi Kingston singles push. But for now, let's talk about these NXT call-ups then. What does the future hold for... Let's start with Ricochet.
Ricochet, as Hamflet points out, will get over and will get a hot reaction from the coldest of starts, because he's just a guy who's physically equipped to make your jaw drop. He's just the one and only. He's an alien. He's a supernatural performer. His body should not work in the way it does. He's an outstanding talent, and there's actually way more depth to his work than that fawning praise would suggest. He's not a great talker. In spite of all that, he's not a great talker. He's earnest and he's passionate, but he's not really composed. He's not really particularly charismatic on a verbal capacity. And for that reason, I can just see him not doing a great deal on Raw. I'm sorry, it's just, I don't want to have these opinions. I really don't. But realistically, the way Raw's formatted, and despite the big sweeping changes we were promised on the December 17th Raw, none of this has changed whatsoever. The way Raw is formatted, on the very show that more change was promised, i.e. Ricochet and Black and all the rest of it, began with a 20-minute promo from the key player, which was Triple H in this instance. It's either an authority figure or a guy or a woman who is at the forefront of the narrative. Ricochet will not be able to do those 15-minute promos, and because he can't do those 15-minute promos that nobody really wants to see, he's not going to be main eventing anytime soon. Unless there's some kind of major grassroots organic yes movement or the man movement or Rusev Day. Unless something like that happens on his behalf, he's not going to be a Universal Champion anytime soon.
We haven't contrived to make this a counterpoint thing between me and Sidgwick, but I think Ricochet is a good starting point, because I'm slightly more optimistic about him, but not necessarily for the obvious reasons, such as how incredible these physical feats are. For me, he's been one of the unusually rapid success stories for the benefits of what exists of the WWE developmental system in that finishing class, or whatever it is they call it, the Performance Center. You couldn't not be a fan of Ricochet when he became a viral wrestler and then an independent superstar, when what you were seeing was just nothing that you'd seen before. But I've been really impressed from his debut to now with how he has actually, his matches have improved and how he uses his body. And Sidgwick's right, he's not a great talker, but his physical charisma goes a lot further than it used to since working with NXT, and obviously working with a lot of guys that could never do what he could do in the ring, but can offer him a lot of the little touches and a lot of the little nuances. And I've got a lot of faith in what he'll be able to do in those matches where a lot of the guys we see now being normalised. It does always sound like we're falling back on the likes of Seth Rollins and Dolph Ziggler as our punching bags. We are not. But the way they use their bodies, it does not entertain half of the crowd. Otherwise, their matches would not feel as dull and as dry and as tired as they are. I think Ricochet's got more in him than a lot of those guys. And I have to say this, not to sort of segue or jump ahead with it, like looking at someone like Aleister Black has those same skills, but it will not help giving him 8 minutes against Elias to normalise him on night one, because he's another one, if we can move on to him, where he was another guy that I thought was a great, maybe not elite level independent wrestler, and then within 2 or 3 weeks on NXT, I was seeing the things that they were extracting from him, the way in which he was. It might be how he works with the cameras, or how he's manipulating his body, or the use of the black mass, with the exception of the Lars Sullivan botch. Immediately felt like this incredible impact finisher that I hadn't really seen in him before. So he's another guy that strikes me in the right context. His wrestling will do a lot of the talking for him, but night one against Elias was.
Why is he in a chin lock?
A disastrous way to debut.
Yeah, Aleister Black, for me, I'm way more worried about him as opposed to the others, because Aleister Black's got this aesthetic that is super serious, and if Raw is anything, it is not super serious. The amount of broad comedy that's underpinned that program, particularly in the last 2 years, is like astonishing. We're talking about Christmas Eve Raw, in which Braun Strowman, who at the time was going to fight Brock Lesnar at the Royal Rumble, was like putting Christmas hats and things on Paul Heyman. Like, even the highest of stakes storylines, there's like an undertone or an overtone of comedy. Aleister Black is absolutely incompatible with that mentality on Raw, and I worry that next week Elias is going to do like a heavy metal concert. Because, look, this guy's heavy metal, so let's poke fun at him in this way.
Platform to appear from the dark with his
acoustic guitar and all the rest of it. Like, the way that the mentality behind the Raw brand and the way it's formatted and the comedy, like Aleister Black, I'm really, really anxious about him.
Yeah, I'd say Aleister Black is probably the one I'm most concerned about out of the four. I think the nuance to his character that we get to see in NXT could easily be scrubbed away, and arguably already sort of has been on Monday Night Raw. Ricochet, to give my point about him, I do have a little bit more confidence for him. I think if he was left to perform on like a SmackDown, for example, against the amazing array of talent they've got on there, we saw that in the Chamber match, of course. I think he could do some big things, and also from personal experience, we obviously worked with Ricochet when he was working for us in WCPW. And we had a show that I remember I brought my then girlfriend to and her friends. And they knew certain names. Obviously, we had some big names that we were booking in WCPW. But they left talking about Ricochet because he just, it's the look, it's the, as you say, it's the eye-catching ability in the ring. And ever since then, he's the sort of person they were looking at. And even this morning, my other half said to me, "Oh, Ricochet was on Monday Night Raw," which is a good sign for someone who's such a casual fan or something like that. Let's move on to Johnny Gargano. We'll finish on the NXT champion. So let's move on to Johnny Gargano. They described him as a technical wrestler, which slightly worried me on Monday Night Raw. And he's had a wobble. I know you've said this yourself in NXT when he went to sort of the dark side. But he could become a real white meat babyface.
I mean, I was initially not a fan of his experiment with the heel side, but I think he's actually nailed it in the past month or two, particularly in that match against Aleister Black was the turning point for me. It was a turning point, yeah. It was his performance. I was hating him, but for the right reasons, when he was like doing the little wave for the guys listening on the podcast. He's just like, he acted the prick really well. He's not like performing as if he's in a Marvel movie anymore. It's like he's put himself in a wrestling context. Johnny Gargano, and again, like, it's so difficult to not be reductive and cynical, but we've got so many years of history, especially pronounced as it's been over the past few years. The guy's tiny compared to what Vince McMahon sees as the ideal professional wrestler. He's going to have to do a great deal of work, but to Gargano's credit, like, he's been very, very clever about who he's borrowing inspiration from and whose learning tree he sat underneath, and he is very much added a lot of Shawn Michaels flourishes to his work. And I think Vince McMahon will realise, hang on, we've got a guy who's becoming a bit of a sports entertainment polymath here. Maybe this acting, which he's improved exponentially, will actually do him some favours. But I mean, just look at the size of him. I mean, you can't not be cynical. Look at the chaos and the shambles Raw has become, and look at the size of Johnny Gargano. See where he fits in, and you can only really forecast cynicism.
There's not a lot worse in WWE than being a utility guy. And Johnny Gargano stands to be the most talented utility wrestler they've maybe ever had. And I wish for nothing worse than that for him, because I've come to love this new version of Johnny Gargano. And I think, again, this could sort of contradict what I was saying earlier on about the NXT audience being tiny compared to Raw's, but it's the worst time for this character to come up to the main roster. If he was all white meat babyface, then he could come onto the stage and immediately portray that character. If he was a heel, it wouldn't matter that me and Sidgwick don't like the dark side version of him. At least he would debut as a heel, and you would know what this character is. He is intentionally, and brilliantly, I must say, playing a very undefined version of himself at the moment, and he was asked to debut on Monday Night Raw as that version. No fan should expect, if they've never seen Johnny Gargano, or they don't understand the relationship with Ciampa, or they don't understand what his character is currently going through, no fan should be expected to understand that. And Gargano, how on earth, what he must have said to Triple H backstage was like, can you tell me how to project whatever it is I'm supposed to project tonight? Like, was the instruction, just be DIY tonight. Just do a bit of a babyface DIY, and then it turns to Ciampa and he says, well, how can I be the babyface DIY when I'm the most evil champion this brand's ever had? It's the misdirection of these characters at this time to be debuting on Monday Night Raw is perhaps the biggest hurdle he's got to overcome.
I will give them a tiny bit of credit, because they were filmed backstage before the match in a segment with Chad Gable and Bobby Roode, where it was very subtle, like remarkably subtle by Raw standards. Ciampa was saying to Gargano, you know why we're here? We're here to change the world and represent NXT. And Gargano looked at him as if to say, like, do not patronize me. Like, I'm sick of the way you treat me and all the rest of it. It was really quite subtle. It was serving the characters that they have in NXT. But again, look at Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn.
Let's move on to one of the greatest heels of all time in Tommaso Ciampa. He is a sensation, of course, on NXT. Can that continue on the main roster?
Yeah, short answer, yes, I think it can. I don't trust him on Raw. The echoes of the comedy thing that we mentioned about Aleister Black is something that's bothered me with Ciampa, because I'd hate to see him reduced to a skit backstage, because I think it undermines when he's sort of in a comedic role, or he's asked to do something that's quite darkly amusing, the darkness overwhelms anything amusing, and I don't think Raw scripting allows for that. I think he'll be the butt of a joke, or he'll get rolled up, or something that will just reduce all of his power and all of his impact. He's a dark overlord of NXT. He's the guy that initially drove Johnny Gargano to the dark side, even if now it appears as if Gargano's got his eye on a prize and he's looking at a bigger picture. I do believe that there's a really bright future ahead for Ciampa. I think this is going to sound really cynical. He needs to stay as ripped and chiseled as he is, because I think Vince wants to see a body like his in Gorilla versus his two opponents, the Revival on Monday Night Raw. Like, that's what he's going to look at. He's going to look and be impressed visually with the way Ciampa has transformed himself to look like this sort of almost this independent version of Triple H. I think he's going to want to see more of that from him. But it feels like the most cliched take. I would feel a lot more comfortable about his future if he was starting life on SmackDown.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, again, the format, the mentality, the philosophy of Raw is incompatible with these characters. And what really frightens me is go back to those halcyon days of 4 weeks ago, when EC3, Nikki Cross, Heavy Machinery, and Lacey Evans. I laughed when I saw these call-ups, because look at the quality on NXT and look at the names that were called up. And then, as the days passed, I came to realise, hang on, if Raw is what it is, a sports entertainment, action adventure, variety show, which is they've actually pitched it as in the past, those four names are as broad and as daft as possible for that show. Nikki Cross is crazy, like EC3's good-looking muscles, Heavy Machinery with daft. Like, as Hamflet pointed out at the time, Vince just looked at the 8x10s and just went, right, I'll have them. And it kind of made sense. But look at what's happened to those four acts. It's absolutely incredible how shambolic that introduction has been botched. And if Vince cannot correctly cast his preferred archetypes, how on earth is he going to book these guys who, realistically, knowing everything we know about Vince McMahon, he's kind of desperately and reluctantly went, yeah, get these guys in, get these pinch hitters in, get these ringers in from NXT, Paul, that you think are so good. If we're having such a disastrous WrestleMania season, get these guys in, let's see what we can do. But nah, for me, I'm very worried.
Very quickly, if Triple H is in charge of the main roster as opposed to Vince, for whatever reason, we live in hope, Do you have more hope for these 4 NXT names?
Absolutely not. It's nowhere near as simple as, I'll just make NXT on Raw, because there is a casual audience that we know for a fact is definitely markedly different to the NXT fans, because why wouldn't they react to the NXT crowd? So you got to serve them effectively. But one thing that Triple H has got going for him, which Vince McMahon absolutely does not, is the capacity for change. Because if you look at Vince McMahon's treatment of developmental dating back 12 years ago, he literally bantered off the Spirit Squad, put them in a box and sent them back to OVW. If you look at the guys he thought were the future, and I love Sheamus, I think he's a really good physical worker, he put the car horse behind him and it didn't really work out. He has changed with the times. He's looked outside of the WWE bubble, seen what was hot, and basically the way I've put it in the past is he's looked at PSG and he's got a new formula. PSG minus comedy, minus a bit of self-indulgence, plus major production values equals NXT. He's looked at what's popular, refined it, somehow made it fit under the WWE umbrella, and made this intoxicatingly brilliant brand for pro wrestling. I think he could modify it into Raw. Personally, I think he could.
I'm excited about Triple H in that chair because I personally believe, only based on anecdotes, that he can actually delegate more than Vince McMahon. One of the reasons Vince McMahon can't concentrate on one of the things he used to be really good at, which is booking a wrestling show and promoting, is because he's got 50 million other things to do, because he's set up this organisation to be this bloated, swelling empire. Triple H will look at those roles and he will give them to other people because he's a wrestling guy and he wants to book a wrestling show. So on 3 hours every Monday night, he can just concentrate on that, and he won't be thinking about the lines he's got to feed Michael Cole about whatever advertisement campaign they're doing at the time, or he won't have one eye on a meeting that he's got tomorrow morning about the XFL. Like it just won't be the madness of King Vince. It'll be Triple H running a wrestling show and him employing other people to do the other jobs that he doesn't see as being as important as that.
Well, gents, thanks very much. Let us know your thoughts on the future for these 4 NXT call-ups and, of course, for Kofi Kingston in the comment section below. You can tweet them at us on Twitter. We are at WhatCultureWWE. You can follow us all on Twitter, in fact. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
Sidgwick.
You can follow me at Adam Wilbourn. As I said, you can follow us all at WhatCultureWWE. Make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes or Spotify for daily wrestling podcasts, or both. My thanks to the Dudley Boys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.
Draw.